to all the cohort on this line. It's always a really kind of delightful opportunity to speak to you guys about the industry, talk about the kind of future for you and for me. So I'm really excited to be here, and I would just sort of extend that, Charles, it's really beautifully organised the way you've put the questions together and the evening together. But if anyone wants to break out of the structure and ask me anything free form, I'm also really happy to do that too.
With today's session, obviously we'll have a little bit of introduction from ourselves, and we'll get it straight into questions submitted by you guys during the registration process. We'll see how we go for time. There are a lot of questions, and thank you guys for submitting so many. There's currently about 40 of you. There was about 50 odd questions. If we do get time to live Q&A, we'll see how we go. And I guess we'll just start off with the brief intro of Alexander at Code. Jeremy?
Would you like that? Would you like that from me, Charles?
Yep.
Okay. Well, my I guess kind of short form is that we're architects and interior designers. We're in Sydney, although we have worked both and continue working state and internationally. We are what we kind of refer to as turnkey consultants. So we're architects, and I am the kind of registered architect for the practice. And we're interior designers, and we also do design of furnishing, furniture and lighting. And what that does is it gives us the capacity to work on projects from the very start, so from the very beginning of a project brief through to the final delivery and bump in of furniture and lighting and styling, which, although not unique in the industry, for a small enterprise like us, we're about 24 on our team, it is something of a strength. We also work between sectors, so we're not just residential, but we're commercial, and within commercial we sit in hospitality, restaurant, bars, hotels, placemaking, retail, office, and then the single occ residential, so single houses. We tend not to do much density residential work because it's sort of not our interest. But anything where we can do really innovative exploratory work, some kind of work which is not straight out of the box, stuff which pushes us, stuff which pushes our practice, that tends to be where we like to reside. So that's us, Charles.
Jump in straight into submit the questions. Again, there is no bias showed to whatever question is of. There's a huge range of them, from career development ones to architecture and design, towards industry, and also COVID-19 questions. So once again, there is no bias. I jumbled them up. It's a bit random, but Jeremy, if you're ready?
Yeah, let's do it, Charles.
All right, first question. What advice would you give to a student aspiring to follow a career in A, architecture, and B, interior design?
The first is that, given my experience, I don't yet know the difference between architecture and interior design. So I trained in architecture. I did 6 years. I did a year off. Took me 7 years. I spend at least 50% of my life doing interior design and object and furniture design. The shortest way I can understand the difference between architecture and interior design is that the institutions don't believe they have enough time to teach you both, so they specialize them. I think the first thing I would say then is there's not a lot of difference between the inside of a door and the outside of a door. If you want to define architecture and interior design, what you are doing is trying to create space. And if you have the capacity, and some people do, and if you have the interest, which some people do, there is no reason you can't do both. So given that you probably have an audience of really ambitious, clever people on the line who want to do both, what would be my advice to you? I think that, like anything, you can make this as special and as influential as you want it to be, and that you have the capacity to do work which changes the culture. like you, also have capacity to do work that allows you to remain or be or become invisible. And I would just encourage you to do the work that changes the culture.
What makes Alexander & Co. different to its competitors in the architecture and design industry?
Funnily enough, Charles, I have a sense that we are kind of connected, and I believe in open networks. And what that means is that I don't believe we have competitors. We don't work in a world where we are trying to beat anyone else. We have, I guess, a culture in our practice, and we have a psyche within our practice where each project we are trying to do is to be the best version of itself and of ourselves. So maybe that makes us different. I'm not here to win anything at all, and I'm not here, and nor is our practice here to beat anyone, which would mean that we're in competition. What we hope to do is to be in a practice which is focused on connecting people, connecting ideas, connecting thoughts, and moving us all forward together to a more creative, a more socially and a more environmentally sort of sustainable place. We do that by underpinning the culture in our practice on growing our people, which we are exploring how to do better each day, and on bringing people together with kind of shared principles and shared pillars around the quality, how we do the work to make sure that it doesn't create any damage along the way, and how we do work which looks at challenging old ideas and introducing new ideas. So I guess there are no competitors. We're all here together, and we want to do the best work, and we want to help really the people around us who are not in this practice also do the best work they can do. The more people in our industry challenging and pushing the whole bar up and making this industry do better, smarter, more innovative, more captivating work, the better work we have to do to stay relevant. So not in competition, Charles, I guess would be the summary.
What's the toughest challenge you faced as a student studying at university?
Oh, you know, I was a terrible student, Charles. I think, look, it's so hard. If I reflect on my experience of being at university, there was a moment in time when I met a couple of people towards the 5th year and even into the final year, which was my 6th year of uni, which really changed my approach towards what I was doing. And every year up until those final years where I met those people, and they were like a couple of close colleagues within the university degree, who I went on to be very good friends with or even to be in business with, and one or two tutors, I was really lost at university and really didn't understand the role of it. I think that coming out of school, coming in as a late teen or early 20-year-old, I was really just unsure of how I could give value, how I could be of value to the industry, and how I could do anything that had any value to anyone else. So I think the toughest challenge of being at university was not being at university. It was probably being an early 20-year-old trying to understand what my value was in the world. And it took a couple of people to believe in me in order for me to believe in myself and in my own capacity. So I think the challenge is not a university issue. The challenge is an issue of, being a human and ultimately being an adult in the world.
If you went back in time, what's something you have done differently then?
Oh, far out. Everything. No, well, I say that, Charles, but everything I have done has taken me to this point. I think if I look back and sort of reflect on my time, both at university and in practice. So I graduated in about 2001. So I'm in about my 20th year of practice. Probably one of the biggest lessons is that it's your mistakes that make you. You're not made because of your successes. You're made because of the kind of failures that you collect. I think if I knew that, that would have given me a less difficult experience for the last 20 years. And you know, I continue every day in practice now to make so many mistakes and to uncover so many flaws in my thinking. But as soon as you reframe the experience as being one of collecting errors and studying your errors, and once you change your psyche from trying to get things right to trying to understand how and why you get things wrong, I think you enable the experience to be much less challenging and much more reflective, and ultimately a much more efficient kind of growing process. We within our practice are exploring how to uncover our own blind spots, how to challenge one another, how to give a kind of frequent, high quality, high cadence critical feedback. And it's all based on the concept that the more you understand about what you are not getting, in air quotes, right, like the more space that you have to get better and to grow. But I think for a long time, my sense was that things were right and wrong, and that the whole job, the whole kind of concept was about not getting them wrong. And once I sort of worked out that this is all about getting it wrong and then working out why, then the experience became a lot more fun and the capacity to grow became a lot faster.
It's all about that learning process, I suppose.
Understanding the process, the role of the process, discovering your own weak spots, your own kind of blind spots.
Yeah. Architectural practice differ from what you study at university?
In every way. I mean, there's almost nothing. There's almost nothing that's parallel between academic work and practice work. I think that it doesn't mean that architecture or architectural study or university doesn't have a place. It has a really specific place, but it's not a place that prepares you for work. It's a place that prepares you to think. So the feedback that I give people who are at university are like, oh, but we don't do any of, we don't do trigonometry in the office. Like the concept is not that what you're trying to do is work at university. You got oodles and oodles of time to do work when you have to go to work. What you're trying to explore at university is how to think. And as soon as you stop wanting university to be like work, and you start allowing university to be a place where you explore how to think, suddenly university has a whole different value. You'll probably not again in your life, unless you go back to uni, be in an environment where you are just given the time and the space to promote critical thinking about ideas. Maybe you'll be lucky to work in a practice which is really explorative and has heaps of resources and bandwidth to do it. But in my life, it's taken me 21 years to get back to a place where I'm purely thinking about concepts intellectually. University is that space. University is the space where you explore just the mechanisms of your mind. You explore what interests you. You start to be able to think critically about the world around you. Hopefully you start to be able to think critically about your place in the world and how you interact with it. None of that is what work is there to do. Work is to put concepts into the field. It's to actually, build things commercially for clients. And where you go from being, the principal mind in your projects, you go from a central story where you are telling your own story for people who will give you feedback on it, when you go into the working environment, into the field, you're no longer working for yourself, you're working for a client. And every dynamic changes because of that. But hopefully you've come prepared to think critically about your environment, because you've spent anywhere between sort of 3 and 6 years focused on how to think critically.
So if you add a bit more on this question, what would translate over from university?
In terms of technical skill sets, I make a distinction in practice. Most of you guys, if you come in postgraduate, will come in a technical capacity into a practice. And within design practices, there's quite a distinction made between technical work and kind of creative work. Not in all, but probably in a lot. So the difference, as we said, is in the technical work, where you might come out of university, a really diligent hard worker who's really ambitious and can use a CAD software or can use Illustrator or InDesign, is that you can come into the practice and the practice will say, look, you don't know much about what we do, but you can use CAD. Here's some drawings, go draw them. And what you expect to see is that you develop as a practicing adult for someone who has technical skills to someone who can say, what do I think about this idea? And what do I want to challenge within this brief? And what strategically do I see as the challenges with the next number of years, the life cycle of this building? And that's when you go from being a technical operator to a kind of creative design voice within the practice. So I think the strongest skills that you can come away with from university are the capacity to think critically, to be a kind of human in this world who wants to add value, who wants to change the culture, who has an aspiration to at some point be creative and a thought leader. And then the practical tools of I can do some technical stuff sufficiently that I can get a job somewhere, because you need a foothold. And practices are going to employ principally young creative people because they have a technical skill that they can sell. But hopefully that's not where you stop. In some people's lifespan, in some people's design career, they may start and stop as a technical operator, and that might suit them, it might suit their needs. For other people, it may be the technical skills are a foothold to get into the practice because they want to do more of the creative thought work and less of the technical work. An example is that in our practice, I don't know how to use the CAD software, nor do I know how to use InDesign. So I can't use any of the technical software that we use in the practice, but it's not where my interest lies. It's not where my role lies anymore.
Right. A particular type of projects you would enjoy designing more than others? If so, why?
There definitely is. I guess to circle back on the concept of clients, the projects that we want to do are principally for clients who want to work with us and want to work with our brand, and who trust us to do work which is innovative and right for them. So what am I saying? We'll work on lots of different types of projects if it's a house or a commercial project or a restaurant. But it doesn't matter how big the brief is or how much money comes in the brief. If the client doesn't want us to do thoughtful work, or if the client says, hey, we don't really know who you are, we just want this project to look like that project over there, then it doesn't matter what you pay us, we won't do that work. So we're really guided in our practice by clients who want to work with us to do kind of hopefully as much as is possible extraordinary work which is innovative, and then who are willing to pay us for the time that it takes to do that work. So there's a couple of factors there. If it's a house or if it's a office, it sort of doesn't matter. If the brief is around kind of thought, innovation, spatial innovation, social, sustainable, those pillars, and they're willing to pay for what it takes to get that done, we'll explore the brief.
So you said the distinction between a residential project and a commercial project, for instance.
I just lost you, Charles. Can you say that again?
So are you saying there's, like, in terms of interest, there'd be no difference between a residential project and a commercial project?
In terms of interest, there's no real difference. In terms of technical skills and process, it's massively different. So the way a commercial project is run, the investment of the stakeholders in a commercial project and the investment of the stakeholders in a residential project, the entire consultation process is fundamentally different. But actually, for me, it's about having both. It's about understanding the differences between both, being challenged by both, that makes the practice interesting. So we have the benefit that before we knew better, we started doing both, and we made every mistake you can conceive running each. And it allows us to realize that they both have really important roles to play within the practice. They're totally different, but we love them both the same.
Sure, which is good. Sounds good.
I can, just to build on that, Charles, I was just thinking, so that to be more specific. If you have a residential or a commercial project, what you find is that the timeframes are different, the commercial urgency from the client is different, that the organisation that at the client end, so their availability, how structured they are, they're all fundamentally different variables within the project. So it's quite nice to go from a residential project with a single stakeholder, you know, an owner of a house who wants to be in there for 30 years, who's really interested in every single detail, to some commercial projects where the scale is massively bigger, the time frame is massively shorter and more pressured. The client's interest is more of a commercial, it's based on kind of business pillars rather than aesthetic pillars. So understanding the different decision-making kind of modalities of different clients is really interesting. It allows there to be some diversity within the practice.
So what are some important qualities and skills you look for in graduate applicants or internship applicants, given their probable lack of experience?
Well, we employ a lot of interns, actually. And we see a lot of interns. And we tend not to take on graduates unless they have done an internship. So the kind of qualities and the skills, well, they kind of range. You know, what we find is that we can employ young adults who come into our practice as interns and might put on their earphones and spend 12 weeks coming in twice a week with their kind of earphones on, not speaking to anyone, not really participating in much. And then, you know, at the end of it, this is before we gave better feedback, let's say, how did I do? And your response might be, well, you've just been sort of sitting there with your headphones on for 12 weeks. We're not really sure. And so we started to realize that at even an intern level, what we needed to do was give pretty structured guidance around what seemed like pretty simple concepts. It's quite difficult to tell someone as who's an adult, hey, take your headphones out, you're missing all the action, you can't hear what's going on, because they seem like really, they seem too obvious. It almost seems condescending to ask someone to do that. So what we learned is that we needed to give quite critical feedback quite frequently, even to people who are coming in at graduate or internship level. But the type of feedback that we had to give is massively different. Someone who has been exposed to a working culture before, who's been exposed to a working environment, who's had to build relationships, who's had to solve problems, may come in with a really wide capacity at the age of 23 or 22. But someone who's never worked before, who's spent their whole time doing university, has absolutely nailed university, but's never done it within a wider community, has never done it in a social group, has never had to solve problems within a broader context, has never had to build relationships. Suddenly those guys come in with all these technical skills, and absolutely no way to apply them because they can't navigate how to exist in a practice. So we tend to, in our practice, look for social skills, look for cultural skills, communication skills, and a little bit of technical capacity. But other practices might just be looking for technical capacity. Some practices which have a big like CAD machine that runs their office, they might be really comfortable to find people who can take an instruction and work in Revit. It's not our practice. So our practice is built more around social pillars, sort of social cultural inquiry, group communication, kind of group belonging, and then technical. So those are probably more the skills that we look for. And to that degree, I think it is important that people are exploring different sorts of practices based on where they want to put themselves, where they want to challenge themselves. If you're really fascinated by an organization which is built on kind of culture, community, collaboration, probably better not to put yourself in a position where you're going to be sitting doing AutoCAD for 12 hours a day in silence with your headphones on, and vice versa. So there are really different types of practice communities. For us, the practice community is built on people and relationships.
Do you have suggestions on how students develop their careers while navigating through COVID-19?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that our practice hasn't seen any impact from COVID-19 from a business point of view. So the first part of this answer is some practices have sailed through COVID-19 because of the type of work that they're doing, and that COVID-19 has not affected everyone equally. If you were doing retail work, which we had some retail clients, and if that's all you were doing, you probably would have found that the COVID period was really tough because all of your clients stopped spending. If you are in a practice which was more diverse or which was doing residential and commercial, or principally residential, you might not have felt anything at all. So I guess the number one thing is that not all practices suffered. In fact, we found the year to be a really great year from a business point of view. It was our strongest year to date. But if I think about opportunities for students and career development, it's no different during COVID as it is to any other time, insofar as you have a massive amount of opportunity to grow your intellect, to grow your interest, to grow your brain, because every resource you're ever going to need is online, and it's usually free. One of the conversations that we might have with a new graduate is, hey, how you going? What you been up to? And they'll be like, just nothing. I'm not doing anything. It's COVID. I can't get a job. And we'll be like, great. What are you doing instead? And they'll be like, well, like, what do you mean? And I'd be like, well, like, there's like infinite number of podcasts. There's infinite number of books. There's web tutorials on YouTube for like, a bazillion hours. There is so much resource out there to grow your skills. It doesn't take a practice. I came across 2 weeks ago this lovely little kind of email that got sent to me, and I try and go through most of my emails, but it was from a 3D rendering lady who was in kind of Sydney, and she had done a project where she'd done some 3D rendering for an architect for a piece of furniture. And then she had gone on and done a project where she 3D rendered a virtual apartment for this piece of furniture. And it was like a, Paris apartment. And she sent me the email and said, hey, just wanted to say hi, you don't know me. I do this 3D rendering. I've done this exercise. I made up this apartment and I've attached it into this email in a link so you can do a 3D fly through just on your iPhone. Just wanted to let you know, this is what I do. This is what I kind of get really excited about. And if you want me to do anything for you, just let me know. And I called her like 2 weeks later and said, hey, we'd love you to do that for us too. So I guess we live in a space which is super interconnected. We live in a space where you can make contact with just about anyone, and with a bit of perseverance and with enough luck, that could work out to be a lead. And you live in a space where you're inundated with resources, and there's no excuse not to bring them on. Like you can use these resources to be a better you. So if you're passive in this experience, and if you don't utilize the time that you have, it's on you. But if, like this last Lana, who took a piece of furniture from a furniture designer, built an apartment around it, turned it into a 3D software and wrote me an email and got all the bits in between right, like she addressed it to me, because I get a lot of emails from people that say, dear sir, madam, like just simple stuff. Like she just researched my name, checked who I was, and wrote me an email saying, this might interest you. If it does, I'd love to speak to you. I was like, this is awesome. And sure, they'll be working it for her and there'll be a job there, because we want her skills and we want people like her who want to engage with our practice. So my advice is, one, COVID-19 didn't affect everyone. It continues not to affect everyone right now in the same way. Some people have not been affected, some people benefited. So number one, I guess it's a misnomer to just have this idea that COVID's been bad. For us, for our practice, it's been the best year culturally and economically that we've had. But two, the opportunity to grow yourself and build your own relationships and to reach out and like the question I said before, to get it wrong. You know, this guy who emailed me on the weekend who gave me the dear sir, madam, I wrote back and said, hey man, like the opportunity is not going to come up this time, because the work you need to do is the work of understanding how to reach out to people. It's of how to find my name and email me. But like, best of luck, like go out there and give it another crack. Go out there, you guys too, and collect those errors, like collect those mistakes, explore where you can get this wrong and just keep trying. Because you'll iron out the creases of your email, you'll work out your skill set, you'll work out that you can do work that someone else is interested in. And like Lana, someone like me at some point will respond and say, let's do some business together.
That was really insightful. Yeah, great, thanks.
Pleasure.
How and where do you find inspiration for your designs?
Everywhere, Charles. So we have such a wonderful, complex world. I mean, between the natural world, so the kind of ecosystems that we live in that we need to protect, the social systems and the people that we deal with, the kind of minds and thoughts of all those peoples and all those industries around us, art, culture, there is just so many reference points. I used to be in a partnership in a practice called Akin Creative, now called Akin Atelier. And I was in practice with my then business partner, a guy called Kelvin Ho, who I went to uni with. And one of the remarkable skills that I learned from Kelvin was that to be a human in the world is just vital. And that's to understand what makes us as cultures tick, what makes art change, what makes pop culture move in one direction or another, to understand why zeitgeists exist, to understand how all that has taken place in the natural phenomena of the landscape around us, to understand the place of memory and literature and storytelling. Like, there's just inspiration in everything, everywhere. And when I started, we had books and magazines, and now you just type it up and you can go down any rabbit hole and you can explore any concept. And so the problem is not content, the problem is not finding inspiration. In fact, finding now is as easy as it's ever been. The role now is in being able to curate what you find and to give back value. And the bigger lesson, I suppose, for you guys is once upon a time, this is about finding it. Once upon a time, way before your time, finding it was hard. Finding a book and going to a library was hard. Now it's none of that stuff. Pinterest is the most remarkable tool I've ever seen. It's just incredible. Finding it is not hard. Trying to understand how to give value back, that is the thing that is hard. So I guess everything you need now is everywhere. The role that you guys have to work on is how to give back value. And the wonderful thing about that is that there's some really obvious places that people right now need value. We live in a world which is challenged because of a lack of human relationships, a lack of relationships with culture, with the kind of natural environment, with genuine ecosystems, with kind of genuine art. We live in a world where things move in a way that can often be kind of quick and meaningless. So I suppose the benefit of that is that the way that you give value back is also not hard to find either. It's all just there. You just have to engage with it.
What programs or software does Alexander and Co help?
It's very topical at the moment, Charles. We're looking at changing. Look, at the moment, aside from the kind of Photoshop suite, which is InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, blah, 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 which is still a kind of staple, we've been going through, I guess, a kind of bit of a metamorphosis of our software. The team uses SketchUp still and AutoCAD 2D. So line work drawings and SketchUp to build out the 3D in pretty much one-to-one detail. We've done that for the last 8 years, not because it's right, not because it's clever, but because it's what we've done. We have systems built around working in 2D line work and 3D models in SketchUp. The systems are built on speed, not on complexity. Some practices which have much more complicated projects than we have done for the last 5 or 6 years will be working in BIM software like ArchiCAD and Revit. We are starting to explore the role of BIM software within our practice. It's something that we're just doing really carefully. The big challenge for us is that we are a design agency. We are a think tank, and what we don't want to become is a CAD machine. So there's a real tension that's held in our team behind foregoing the speed of our software to allow us to be creative in our thinking, to use a more sensible, in air quotes, sensible piece of BIM software, which is slower, more technically efficient, but which may influence the speed of our innovation, speed of our thinking, and make our practice more of a practice which is focused on CAD, which is not what we're here to do. So we're looking at ArchiCAD, but we're not sure. We're still sitting in SketchUp and AutoCAD 2D. And a lot of the work that we do, so most of the team, or a substantial number of the team, is on both laptops, but also iPad Pros. And we do a hell of a lot of work just on drawing. Still, we do a lot of sketch work and the iPads. And specifically 2 tools. One is called Procreate and the other is called Morpholio Trace. Those pieces of software still power the visualization in our practice. And I use only, aside from an iPhone, I only have an iPad. I no longer have a computer. And that's because between Procreate and my email and internet, I don't need much more in my role aside from books and discussion.
In industry, do you design with one overarching theme in mind, or does it change based on the brief?
I would say that, so every brief is different. Every client's needs are different. Every human being is different. So their briefs naturally are never the same. But what we design with is, I guess, what we design with are pillars. So that we have kind of pillars that underpin the practice, the work that we do. So I guess you know, a lot of the work that we do is made from kind of real materials, inert materials. Everything's kind of got a handmade sensibility. We are really focused on the people that help make the buildings that we build. So what we call our supply chain, the makers, they're a big part of our practice. So we're 24 in our team, but we're like 124, 224 in terms of the team that actually is required to make our project. So a lot of our focus is on the relationships which help contribute to everything that gets built. So what you might say is a theme is, how do we bring in our networks, our relationships, and the makers who share kind of common language with us to make real things? And maybe an example would be, if you're in one of our projects, you know, you might be sitting on a real leather banquette with real timber underneath it, with a kind of, you know, a burnished brass handle and a kind of, you know, chipped concrete slab and some stone pavers. You would you'd be very unlikely to see us in a project which was full of polyurethane on MDF panels. So that's like a spray on a man-made substrate. So there are things that we just wouldn't do. So in terms of themes, the themes of how we work end up also looking like what our work is. If you use a handful of guys who you know build brass really beautifully, you're going to see that reappear in your work. And if you know that there's a practice which is happy to use anyone, and sometimes, you know, practice A uses like anodized aluminium that looks like brass, that work is going to start looking different. So our work has a thread, not because the projects are the same, but because of the makers, and the thinking around our work is consistent, which is to try and do real substantive work with real materials built on real relationships and real exploration. We know the people who are going to build in our projects, but that wouldn't be normal for a lot of practice. A lot of practices wouldn't know who the joiner is and who the metal worker is and who the brickie is. They just wouldn't know. So we know it matters to us. And so the overarching theme is bringing relationships around projects with people who we trust to make things beautifully by hand.
Just on this, would there be like a recipe for design, or like that you consistently across all your projects?
Yeah, like it's definitely across all of our projects. You know, it's written into our kind of the culture, the stuff that's written in between the lines. If someone wanted to explore a design and they're like, hey, I want everything to be plastic, we would start to be challenged by that. So I guess, you know, they're concepts that we're always exploring. You know, what is our overarching DNA? What are we? I don't think it's a conversation that will ever end. I think it's the thing that we'll continually explore and build more dimension around. But I guess in principle, the work that we do hopefully is work that is new. It's hopefully work that changes and pushes our culture, our creative culture, so the design industry, I guess, you know, hopefully forward. It's work that is trying to not be a replication of work that's been done in the past. The idea of just redoing the same idea over and over is not very interesting for me. So innovation, which is really the process of ideation, of creating new ideas and exploring them, those are all themes that underpin our office. You know, how do we take ideas? How do we explore them? How do we do something better than we've done before? How do we do work which is more interesting, more sustainable, more innovative, more engaging, more beautiful? So this idea of pushing forward, or gently carrying forward ideas to not repeat the past, I suppose that would be a theme.
Is proficiency in BIM software like ArchiCAD and Revit absolutely essential?
Well, in our practice, it's absolutely inessential, Charles, because we do none of it. Again, it's a question of practice you go and work in. In some practices, yeah, absolutely. You want to go and work in a firm that does medium density or high density residential work, and that's all they do. You are coming in a BIM role. You are coming in to do CAD work. In a small practice or an agency like ours, which is much less reliant on BIM documentation, it just doesn't matter. So you're talking about a spectrum from absolutely essential to absolutely no point and everything in between. And I think, again, it just talks to the concept that every practice, like every human being, is just going to be different, have a different culture and perform differently. And I guess the role for you guys is to explore what practice is going to suit the kind of interests and the needs that you might have.
So the bottom line for Alexander and Co would be that for this question and its purpose, it's non-essential.
Non-essential.
Okay, well, at what stage or year of university study is it best to start applying to architecture firms for a job?
It's an interesting question. We get a lot of undergraduates, so people who are in their, if they're doing a 5-year degree, they might be in their 4th, 5th, or final year. I've seen people really thrive coming in as students, and I've seen people really not thrive coming in as students. I think it's such an individual question, such an individual answer. The more you can understand the world around you, I think the better. I worked for 2 years as an undergraduate. I took a year off and worked in a practice. I don't think I did any of it very deliberately. I don't think I did any of it with the concept of what it was going to give me. I just had this sort of sense that I should do this. I think ultimately that the lessons that I learned in just understanding that, like, coming into a practice, coming into a company is super weird. Like, it's complex. You're talking about really specific niche cultures which work in super interesting and specific ways. And if you can get a bit of exposure to that, I think you come in a little bit more aware than some of your contemporaries will who haven't done it, into the complexities of the working world. So maybe come in when you have the kind of intellectual, social, cognitive bandwidth to do it. So don't do it if you're time poor. Don't do it if you're stressed out of your head and just can't give any value to it. Do it when you have the space to really pay attention to the environment, to really suck the marrow of the experience, to really pay attention to it. For some people that might be 3rd year, for some people that might be final year. I think you've got to do it when it's right for you. We've had people come in postgraduate into intern roles after they'd finished the whole shebang, and they do really well too. So this is a really personal question around what your capacity is to pay attention, to explore the space around you. If you're crazily stressed trying to finish your last year of uni and you know you've got nothing to give, don't try.
How should I best show my strength as a student wanting to work in architectural practice?
So I think about myself now when I answered this question. And in order for me to do the work that I do now, I have various coaches who are either within my sort of friendship groups, within my company practice, or we employ them externally. So I think that one thing I would say is spend some time with someone who you trust, to challenge you, to explore what your strengths are. I think just understanding our strengths is the first challenge, is that what you believe to be a strength may be less than what it could be, but what you totally don't realize is your strength, you may not even see at all. We call them blind spots. The wonderful thing about being a human being is you just have no way of knowing your own blind spots, and the value of having people around you, the value of working in a team, the value of being connected to other human beings is that if you choose the right ones and they're really honest with you, not only can they show you your weaknesses, but they can show you the things that you don't realize are your strengths at all and highlight the things that are really, really amazing about you. And I think this is part of adult development. This is part of developing throughout your life and through your career, is surrounding yourself with what we call a feedback loop that can point out what you're great at and what you're not great at. So I'd say that's number one, is that how do I show my strengths? Well, the first thing is just knowing what your strengths are. And the first challenge of that is being a human being, you fundamentally cannot know yourself that well. So surround yourself with really wonderful people who you eat with and drink with and have coffee with, who are willing to tell you about you. And the context of that is that I'm 41 and I've been doing this. I graduated in 2001 and I did 6 years at uni. I do this now, and I have about 6 different coaches now as a practicing human being who are there to point out the things I can't see that are either working or not working in my life and in my practice. Once you know your strength, once you know or start to know yourself better, start to know what your strengths may be, the beautiful thing about turning up and doing an internship is that you are paid absolutely nothing to show what your strengths are. It's the best marketing you can do, is to get yourself into a space where there's no pressure, there's no commercial transaction. You are in a space where you can demonstrate to everyone around you what you are amazing at. This is the world we live in now, where there are so many practices that will give you an internship, and with that internship you have a vehicle to demonstrate yourself and to demonstrate your strengths. And if you have a sense of where your strengths may lie, because you've had some coaching, you've had some discussion, then you come in so much more equipped than people who haven't.
When you say coaching, would you say those are close mentors or friends even?
Yeah, both. So we have, if I think about myself, I have a group of friends who are also business owners who happen also to have been past clients, which is just all current clients, who I meet with reasonably regularly. I have a personal counsellor. I have a business counsellor who is also a specialist in adult developmental psychology. I also, although I haven't seen him this year because of COVID, I also organised, just by reaching out, where I would meet once a month with one of the directors of Bates Smart, a guy called Guy Lake, who I just met with once a month, and I'd have coffee with him. I'd go to his office once a month and buy him breakfast and just talk to him. And again, to put this into context, it's possible to sit in this Zoom call going, but how could I do that? It was no different to me. I emailed a collection of directors. I sort of thought, well, who are the biggest practices in our country? Who are the exemplars of architectural practice? And there was, Woods Bagot, Bates Smart, and there was a couple of the big ones. So all I did is I wrote letters to each of the directors from those practices until someone responded. And then when that person responded, I said, look, I'll come to you. I'm not soliciting. I don't want business. I'll buy you breakfast. I'll do it once a month. You can cancel it at any point. You can tell me you no longer want to speak to me at any point. But until you do that, I'm going to keep showing up once a month. I'm going to schedule it, and I'm going to come organised. I'll give you a kind of an agenda of what I want to talk about, and I'm just going to spend an hour with you once a month. So I guess you have everything from a peer group. You have clients. You can have professional psychologists and counsellors, all the way through to just cold calling other business owners. And probably the right answer is do all of it. Like, just get everything in place. The more feedback loops you have, the more structures you have to support you with people who give you value, the better. And you'll see this throughout your career, that the people who you may aspire to one day be, the people who have achieved really wonderful things within their roles, have never, ever, ever done it alone. They've done it with a massive amount of support from their relationships, from their spouse, from friendship groups, from external mentors and counselors, people who give guidance out of generosity or because they're paid to do so. You will not do this thing alone. This is not a function of how good you can be within your own skin, although I think a substantial part of our postgraduate sense is that I've got to be just the best technician that exists and I'm going to prove the world. As you mature in your practice, you go, I just can't be that good at everything, but what I can do is recruit these incredible minds around me to help me grow. And if I don't know a skill, it's way quicker for me to find the person who's the best at it and spend an hour with them than for me to try and spend 5 or 10 years trying to unbox it myself.
What if the student doesn't know about certain details regarding technical drawings and is tasked to do it while working?
I think this sort of talks to the last question. If you come into the world or you come into an architectural practice with the belief that you are by yourself, with the belief that you have to do things within your own skin without outreach, without connection to other minds, you're really destined to have a very difficult time. You will be asked in more ways and more countlessly than I could ever describe on this call to do things you don't know. It is fait accompli, it is part of life. You simply won't know what you have to do next almost all the time. The first time you do everything, probably the second time you do everything. So what if a student doesn't know about certain details regarding technical drawings? It's the same answer for everything that you don't know. It's that you need to find around you, the role here is to find around you the support network that can help give you support and guidance, and then to find around you the technical resources and the information which is at your fingertips, and combine the two together with your brilliant minds to come up with a solution. You guys aren't expected to come in with knowledge. No practice expects you to know. What every practice will hope that you can do is to problem solve. And problem solving is not coming up with a solution to a complex problem out of your own brain. Problem solving is about recruiting relationships, recruiting conversations, and recruiting other technical information and being able to bring it together. So when you're asked to do a technical drawing that you've never done, that you don't understand, my answer would be do some Googleizing, because Google's wonderful and has half the answers out there. And then once you've done your Googleizing, go grab 10 minutes and buy a cup of coffee for your colleague and say, I have this problem. I have to do this drawing. I've looked at it on Google. I think that there's a solution there, but I want to talk to you about it. Can you just give me a few minutes? And I reckon with the combination of your interest to bring people and problems together, and with your connection to another human being, and with some research that's done beforehand, there won't be too many problems that you guys can't solve. But conversely, if every problem that you're given you think is a problem for you to solve by yourself, you'll find quite possibly that practice is extraordinarily stressful and lonely.
What do you look for in portfolios and interviews?
Do you know, I'll start with the interviews bit. Although I'm a little bit longer in the tooth than you guys, I'm just a kind of human being. And like every human being, I want to sit at a table with someone who wants to be in that space with me, who wants to share that table, who wants to engage with me. So they're kind of simple things, like when I have a conversation, Charles, with you, I believe you want to hear that I'm really interested in your questions, and I am. And I want to believe that I want you to, see that I'm really engaged, that I'm not distracted, that I know your name, that I'm come prepared, that I'm ready, I'm ready to talk. I have some ideas that I'd like to share. You know, I've read a few books, I've done a few things, so that when I sit, what I'm able to do with you is to have a conversation as one engaged, interested, and passionate person to another engaged and interested and passionate person. And so for me, an interview that's really wonderful is one where I feel like the person has brought themselves not as a technical equal to me, because we're going to have very different technical backgrounds, but as a human equal to me, someone who has who's given themselves the right to be at that table, who's given themselves the preparation to ask me questions and to share things that interest them, to shake my hand, to look me in the eye, to be grateful for my time, and also to reciprocate the value in that conversation. If someone comes wearing the most meticulous suit with a beautiful portfolio, a laptop and an iPad, and sits down before I have sat down and doesn't look me in the eye and doesn't call me by my name, that's a far worse interview than someone who comes in a good pair of jeans and a cool pair of sneakers with a lovely letter, a couple of printed photos, and a whole bunch of passion and enthusiasm and engagement for a discussion that they want to have with me. So I think the short answer is we can put way too much time into the documentation that sits behind us and way too insufficient time into preparing us for a conversation. And I would say you need to be prepared. You need to have some documentation. You need to be able to provide evidence of what you've done and where you've come from. It probably needs to be far less than you think. And you probably need to spend far more time being ready for a conversation. Portfolios, it's the same. Simple, short, sharp, punchy, beautifully precise, no typos, doesn't need to be 1,000 pages. You give me 3 or 4 well put together sheets that make me see that you're engaged with the world, and I'll be fascinated to meet you.
I guess we'll finish off with 3 more questions.
Please.
How could students go about finding about the culture of a particular architectural studios and like to work there when we don't know anyone who works there?
Yeah. Cracking question. How do you get into a culture that you are on the outside of? You know, I've seen pieces of software like in the States, we don't have it here, maybe we do now, called Glassdoor, where effectively ex-employees just get on and bag their old boss. Like, I think that those pieces of online discussion maybe not so useful. If I thought about the tools that you guys have available, like LinkedIn is there, I think it would be a totally reasonable thing to do to get onto LinkedIn, to look for people who are employed by the practice you want to work for, and reach out to those people and say, hey, you don't know me. I'd love a few minutes of your time. I'm totally happy to come to you and buy you a cup of coffee. I appreciate that your time is really valuable, but I'm just trying to understand more about this practice that you work in because I'm thinking about applying for a job there. And I bet if you do that enough, you will get enough responses to know what's going on in that practice. If you go to you know, company websites and you look at the project architects who've worked on projects, you'll have names that you can Google. In the Googling, you'll have the contact details of the people who you've Googled. So I think my short answer is I don't think it's hard to find out the people who work in practices. I think it's very easy. To make contact with the people in those practices, I think, is equally easy. And to frame an email which is sincere and curious, that asks for feedback, I think you would be surprised by how many people want to share their feedback with you. And I think that alone will get you into some level of understanding of a culture, of a practice, that you otherwise feel like you are on the outside of. I would say you're simply not that far away from getting the information you want.
What's the general process and workflow of a project from day one to the last?
That's a big question, Charles. The general process and workflow. There is an extraordinary number of workflows that go into an extraordinary number of processes, and it varies from one project to another. I think it's an impossible question to answer in this space. The only thing I think I can share is that it's probably a little bit different on every project, and part of your role is to be inquisitive and curious for every project to understand why it could be different to the last. I know that's a hopelessly opaque answer to that question, but I don't think I can give you anything more specific.
Yep, that's certainly fine. I guess the last question of the day, do you collaborate with other professionals such as engineers and planners? If so, to what extent?
All day, every day, massively. I touched on earlier that our supply chain is not just the makers, but it's the consultants who give their intellectual property to a project. It's that conversation I had which was, we're not just 24, we're 124 or 224 or even 324. Our success as a practice, whatever you deem to be our success, is built on the relationships and the information that we are given from our collaborators. So we absolutely live and breathe based on relationships with people outside of our practice, engineers, planners, designers, creatives, and to the extent that it is almost every day, almost all day.
Thanks, Jeremy. I know we ran a bit over time, but again, I just want to say thank you for your time, and I hope this has been valued to all the students participating with us today. And yes, once again, thank you, Jeremy, for
thank you, Charles. I've got Tess here with me. Tess is just reminding me to ask if anyone has anything they wanted to ask. I mean, I'm happy to give some more of my time now, if that's useful to you guys. If anyone had anything they wanted to throw up in the right-hand corner, or Charles, I'm happy to answer anything.
I guess, to the students that still are with us in the Zoom call, if you want to chuck any questions in the chat box.
I'm curious as to what the difference.
Are you able to read those? They're too quick for my eyes, Charles.
So Jeannie's asked, I'm curious as to what the difference in the responsibility between a principal architect, associate architect, and graduate architect. So the difference.
Yeah, okay. I'm the principal in our practice. I do less of the doing work and more of the thinking work. So I'm spread in a small capacity across most, if not all, of the projects. And my capacity is specifically creative and strategic. As you go through the kind of the stratum of roles, from the principal to the senior and then the senior to the graduate, you tend to find that you're exposed to less projects on any given day or any given week. And your workflow goes from the creative, strategic to the more technical doing. So a graduate architect or a graduate designer may spend most of their time in one or two projects drawing and documenting and drafting, doing the kind of the document production. The senior designer may work on a portfolio of projects, 5 or 6 projects, managing client relationships, managing project resources, money, strategic workflows, checking and coordinating their own team. And the principal might work on 30 to 40 projects, as I do in my practice, but only do the strategic, creative, and then move on. and sit in a lot of meetings and do no technical work at all. So it's, I guess it's the number of project as a kind of concept. It's the number of projects you're exposed to, but also how technical your work is versus how strategic or creative your work is.
Another student has asked, will there be more BIM users in Australia? I found many companies require BIM on LinkedIn.
There's heaps of BIM. I mean, there's heaps of BIM practices. Almost all the bigger practices are going to be using BIM. Like if you're doing a multi-resi project, which lasts for 10 years, if you're doing a stadium or a tower or even medium density, the way that those practices run and those projects run, they're all run on BIM, and they're probably almost all run on ArchiCAD or Revit. So if you want to be doing that sort of work, I would say you really want to be learning that sort of software. There's going to be a kind of need for it. Again, I think that the important thing is to distinguish the technical software that you use is not who you are. And we can get very stuck in identifying as a Revit architect or a CAD or AutoCAD or ArchiCAD architect. It's important to know that, like, you know, you are not an iPhone or you are not a Samsung Galaxy or whatever. Like, they're just technical platforms, and they feel right now as a graduate like the universe, but they're really not.
Another student has asked, where do you see the industry moving in 10 years' time?
Well, I think that the challenge that we have right now globally, as kind of citizens of this earth, will probably either be resolved in the next 10 years, or in 10 years' time, we'll be in a state of fairly terrible decay. And I don't want to sound grim, but I think that we are right now at a tipping point where our industry, but every industry, needs to have a obsession with what the future looks like in terms of sustainability. So I think that the industry will look massively, massively different to what it does now, either because we have changed the way we practice to be obsessive around sustainability, or because we didn't, and we're dealing with a decay and a collapse. And I sound a little bit bipolar around this. I may be, but I'm also suspicious that I'm right.
So another question. What's your favorite architect, except yourself and your colleagues?
Wow. Firstly, whoever wrote that question assumes that I'm a narcissist. I definitely don't. I'm definitely not my favorite architect. I think my work is boring, actually. Look, I still just love the classics. So whenever I'm in doubt, I'll go to a handful of the kind of thought leaders from the last century. Le Corbusier is probably one of them still. Mies van der Rohe, Louis Kahn. You know, there is still just these pillars of thought, and the work that they did, you know, Rem Koolhaas, if you want to choose a contemporary kind of thought leader, the work that those guys have done is so relevant, not because they had solutions, but because they challenged the questions in such a fundamental way. When you come into the world of practice, you'll be maybe staggered by how many practices exist doing shit, or doing things which are in the middle, or doing things which are just there to get done and get finished. And for me as a practicing designer, I'm still staggered by it. There's a whole world of people who practice to start a project just to finish a project, just to get paid. Like you could do anything with your time. And there's practices out there who are just there to get the next project done and ticked. Is incredibly depressing concept for me, that you would want to commit to a 40 or 50 year degree or career to not do anything other than finish a project and start a new project. We have such a limited time alive that our work here is really, really important. And if you find yourself in a space where your entire psyche is to finish the next project so you can start the next project, then I'd say it's time to stop and take stock of what you're doing. There are people out there who manage to combine practice, the work of getting paid to do work, and innovation and thought in such a way that their ideas were more and more and more magical and explorative each time, and they still ran a practice as well. And those are the people who inspire me, the people like Le Corbusier, who could run an architectural practice, who could build a culture. I mean, I'm skipping over the part that he was also a Nazi and a fascist, but who could do the work of running a practice and also do the work of coming up with these massive social, architectural, creative ideas, and be so prolific in their lifespan as to explore so many different frontiers on so many different continents. I mean, those are the guys who I think we should be looking to as our mentors, the people who are able to change the culture, not the people who got work done for the sake of getting work done.
Another question: how to stand up as a graduate in the midst of hundreds of applicants?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful question because I have been there too. I have been an undergrad who felt invisible and was really unsure of how to become visible. And I know the insecurity that comes along with trying to understand what value you can give. So I see it. I see the complexity of it, and it's a thing that continues to unfold. It blossoms throughout your life. Probably there is a lot of things, is the short answer. One of them that's really critical is perseverance. One thing that I didn't have when I started Alexander & Co., which was almost 9 years ago, was any confidence that it would work. So I think that's an important thing to share, is that I've been doing this practicing professionally for 2 decades, and was pretty damn good at my job before I started Alexander & Co. And I started Alexander & Co. with absolutely no sense that it would work. I tell the story that, when you're writing the about section of your website, when you've never done a project, it's really tricky. So you guys are in a kind of interesting position because it's tangentially the same as what I had to do. You have to write the about section of your website, and there's no about. And so you have to dig pretty deep to kind of identify what you're here to do. So I think the standing out bit starts with you guys declaring what you're here for. And that can be as simple as imagining that you're writing your about section of your website and saying, the work I am here to do is, and then name it. And no matter what it is, just sort of standing behind it and going, fuck. In a year's time, you might look back and go, geez, that was a schmozzle, I have to rewrite it, as we did. And then a year later, you might have to go, oh, fuck, it's just terrible, I have to rewrite it again. You rewrite it, you just keep rewriting it, but you have to own your script. You have to put it into your about section of your virtual website, and you have to stand behind it. And you have to turn up in front of people in an internship, in as many interviews as anyone will let you into, and say, here's what I am, here's what I'm about, here's what I'm here to do. Here is the work that I want to do because I am special and I am important, but you just don't know it yet.
What aspect do you think limits the implementation of sustainability in the final design? For example, budget, time, and regulations.
Do you know availability? Availability of options. Here's an example. We've built a project that I'm standing in now. It's called Alexander House. And Alexander House is a concept that we wanted to explore, which is to create a building which was not an office, a building for our team that could be used as a house, as a showcase, that could supply its own water, supply its own power, have inert, sustainable material. We're absolutely obsessed about it. Now, I can't tell you how much junk and rubbish has been produced as a result of building this building. If I want to get a couch and I want to put foam inside a couch, and I say to my suppliers, I want you to scour the country for a compostable, biodegradable, low VOC couch foam, their answer is, well, the only options I have are to use a recycled like wool, which is going to compress over time, not going to be very comfortable, going to cost an inordinate amount of money, and I don't really know where to get it from. So what you have is this problem that the technologies that we're trying to explore to make this world better are in such early stages, some of them in such early stages, that you can build a building where one part of it is incredibly ecological and another part which is incredibly unecological. There's no sense of equality within the building practice. Some building materials that we've used within this building are built from recycled rubbish. They're carbon sequestering. There's no volatile chemicals used in them. We're able to export our own rubbish, bring it back as built material. It's extraordinary. And then there's other things which come wrapped in plastic and which are totally unbiodegradable and, you know, made a whole bunch of waste and rubbish getting here. It's very difficult to standardize the performance of the stuff across a building. So you can have all the intent, you can spend all this time researching it, and sometimes the things just don't exist. So your options can be really limited. So it's an industry where there's a massive amount of space for challenge and innovation, and where there's things moving at different speeds.
So, student has asked, the culture of long hours and all-nighters are commonplace in university, and I assume the same level of rigor exists in the workplace. What are your thoughts on balance whilst practicing architecture, and how do you implement your own principles with your practice?
So if I kind of go back 8 years to when we started this practice, we were as guilty as anyone of having long hours and probably, you know, the occasional all-nighters. And I think one of the things that we've worked very hard to achieve, and we're very close to achieving, is like no all-nighters at all, working within standard kind of business hours, and as much as is possible, actually all paid overtime. I guess what's my attitude towards it? Well, one of our values in our practice is highly valued time. It's very difficult to tell someone that we have highly valued time as one of our core pillars and then tell someone to work overtime for free. The challenge that I think a lot of practices have is exploitation has been a wonderful business model historically and continues to be for all sorts of employers. And I'm saying that facetiously. It's clearly terrible, but it's a great business model. If you can get 20 hours billable work and pay for 10, you're ahead. So I guess what this question sort of challenges is the ethical position of a practice, and then also their technical capacity to deliver to their ethical position. Because once upon a time, we said we really, really don't want to do this, but we did it anyway. And it wasn't until we were able to build a practice that was commercially viable, that understood its own processes well enough, that was sophisticated enough as a company that we were able to remove that time from the working day. That being said, I have a real difficulty with the concept of balance. I think my philosophical problem with the concept of balance between home hours and work hours is it suggests that they are in counterweight, that one balances against another. To use one of the terms from our general manager, she says you lean in and you lean out. There is a lot of potential complexity in everyone's lives, from their own family, their relationships, their personal life, their professional life, their education, community, cultural life. You have to lean in and lean out of these things all the time, in a state of kind of continuum. So there's not a sense of, one thing balanced against another as is work against professional life. There's a state of continuous discovery, continuous flow. And that is a normal, necessary part of being a human being. Working in a practice that it will exploit your time because it doesn't have the technical capacity to work smarter, or it doesn't have the business acumen to work better, is a separate issue. It's an issue that we need to be accountable for ourselves. If we come to work for a practice and we say, look, I'm amazing, I want to be paid top dollar, recent graduate, but I think I should be being paid up here. And then you come in and underperform. A company has only two options. One is to fire you. The other is to make you work harder to pay for yourself. So this is a problem which is cultural, which is organizational, but often is also our own personal responsibility, which is to know that if you have a particular appetite for a particular salary that you can negotiate, that also comes with a particular personal responsibility to be able to do that work. So there's lots of different issues which are in flow together, some of which are in tension, cultural, ethical, business acumen, but also your personal position, your personal skill sets. I think if you find yourself in a practice which is willing to monopolize on your willingness to work overtime consecutively, often to do all-nighters for free, I think ultimately you can vote with your feet, as they say, and leave.
Jeremy, are you happy to have one more question?
Of course.
So the question is, for a mature age student who has worked outside of architecture, design in the past, should they start from the ground up in their career, or if the opportunity emerges to start at a different point in the ladder, should they seize that opportunity?
What's the name of this person, Charles?
Curtis.
Curtis.
Hey,
That's Gina.
I'm asking for a mate as well. Just want to be clear.
Yeah, no worries, Curtis. So the question is, do you come in at the bottom, whatever the bottom is, the bottom of the ladder, or do you take up an opportunity to come in higher up in your role delineation? Is that the question, Curtis?
That's correct. My friends come from a career change and had a really successful career in their other and they're just looking to change and find out whether it would be smart to try and move up quickly in the ladder or do as much groundwork as possible before they moved up.
Yeah. So look, I think it's an interesting question. I don't know if there's an answer. I feel like saying your friend Curtis. But
I'm an honest student. I've had no experience. Okay. I'm 22.
I'm sledging. So I guess there's so many ways to do this. There's just not one way. If I think about myself, I'm kind of probably a bit more old school baby boomer sort of style, started in the mailroom and worked through just about every role. So if I think about my own specific circumstance that have brought me here, my very first role was as a graduate in the print room. So I did the blueprints in a practice, and I've worked through departments, and I've worked across now a lot of departments. I no longer use the technical skills. So my role has been much more linear from the bottom, well and truly at the bottom to where I am now. I think that it's really difficult to understand and appreciate the complexities within a practice if you haven't had to live the challenges of that part of the practice. So I would say the more informed you are, the better the decisions you will ultimately make in any role. If you don't know what it takes to do baseline Revit drawing and you're in a Revit practice, there may be a discussion that says, well, how can you manage the time of your subordinate staff, of your team, if you simply don't know how long this stuff takes? But equally, you might be just super switched on, your friend might be super switched on, and go, well, I can just pay attention, I can use some data, and I can navigate this without having to start at the bottom. Maybe my advice would be, you know, if you can have a taste of everything, not necessarily live and breathe it for years, not necessarily go through the same process of 10,000 hours in every department, but at least have some exposure to it. It will allow you to have a more empathic response to the technical challenges of whatever role your friend comes into. It'll allow him to be more aware of the complexities of what he's dealing with. And rather than trying to come up with a solution to a problem he really doesn't understand, he'll be a bit more informed. So I think, look, I would never say, you know, you're an amazing strategic creative thinker, go start at the bottom and spend the next 10 years of your life in Revit. Like, I think that would be a totally poor utilization of someone's time. But I'd say, look, maybe it's worth understanding how your role can explore the Revit for a year, 6 months, before you get into a role which has to manage or delegate the time of someone who's in Revit, just to give you an example. So I'd say the answer is more complicated than a kind of binary yes, no. But I think the more information you have available, the better decisions you'll ultimately be able to make later on.
Thank you very much. I think that answers the question.
Thanks, Curtis.
Well, I guess we'll conclude it here. Once again, thank you, Jeremy, for all that time you spent answering all those questions for students. For those students, this is recorded, so please don't worry. You can review all of Jeremy's answers after. So again, if that's okay with you, Jeremy, we'll conclude it here.
That's fine. Thanks, Charles. Thanks again for organising tonight, and thank you to everyone who was very patient and stood on the line and listened to me speak. So I'm really grateful that everyone stuck around. And thanks very much for organising. It was a real pleasure.